People say home is where you feel safe, where your heart can rest. For me, home was the opposite. It was a place where something inside me was slowly being torn apart. My mother died when I was 10, and the house changed the moment she was gone. My father remarried within a year. To everyone else, my stepmother seemed patient and kind. She spoke softly in public and smiled at neighbors. But behind closed doors, she was different. She never screamed. She never left obvious marks on my face. Her cruelty was careful, quiet, and constant. She made sure I was always slightly hungry, always exhausted from chores that somehow were never finished correctly. If something went missing, it was my fault. If a glass broke, I must have touched it. When my father was home, she would gently correct me, her voice full of fake concern. The moment he left the room, her eyes changed. They became sharp and cold. I tried to tell father. I showed him the bruises she left on my arms. I told him how she grabbed me by the collar and whispered threats so quietly that the walls themselves seemed to swallow the sound. He would sigh and rub his temples like I was giving him a headache. "You're seeking attention," he would say. "She's trying her best." And just like that, I would become the problem. One Tuesday evening, everything inside me finally snapped. She slapped me across the face for breathing too loud while she was on the phone. The sting wasn't new. What broke me was the way she smiled afterward, satisfied, like she had corrected a misbehaving pet. I went to my room without saying a word. My cheek burned, but my mind felt strangely clear. I packed a single duffel bag with a few shirts, an old hoodie, and the small amount of cash I had saved from mowing lawns and running errands. I didn't plan. I didn't think about consequences. I just knew I couldn't spend another night in that house. When the sun went down, I slipped out quietly and walked until I reached the bus station. I took whatever buses I could afford. Each one carried me farther from home and deeper into places I didn't recognize. By the time my pockets were empty, I had landed in a dusty, gray town that looked like it had been forgotten. The buildings were low and worn down. The streets were nearly empty. Even the air felt still, like the town was holding its breath. I knocked on 3 different doors that afternoon. I offered to sweep floors, wash dishes, mow lawns, or anything in exchange for a place to sleep. Every person who answered looked at me the same way, like I'm suspicious, uneasy. "We don't know you," they said. One woman shut the door so quickly it rattled the frame. Not just distrust, but fear. By sunset, exhaustion settled deep into my bones. I found a rusted bench at the edge of town and sat down, unsure of what to do next. But I noticed, behind me stood a house that looked abandoned. The porch sagged dangerously in the middle, and the windows were coated in thick grime. The paint had peeled away in long strips. It looked like something out of a ghost story, but it had a roof. To me, a roof meant shelter, and shelter meant warmth. I told myself I didn't believe in haunted houses. I went there and pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air smelled stale and heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust coated the floorboards. I chose a corner of the living room, laid my duffel bag beneath my head, and closed my eyes. Compared to home, it felt peaceful. The first night passed quietly. The second night did not. At exactly midnight, a heavy knock shook the front door. The sound wasn't frantic. It was slow and deliberate, as if whoever stood outside had all the time in the world. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that my breath became visible in front of me. Then a freezing wind burst through the boarded-up window. The boards didn't move. They didn't crack or shift, but icy air poured in anyway, wrapping around my neck like invisible fingers. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound brave. I received no answer. I forced myself to stand and walk toward the door. My hand shook as I turned the knob and pulled it open. After pulling the door open, I found that the porch was empty. No footsteps, no movement, just darkness stretching out across the yard. I shut the door quickly. The moment the latch clicked into place, the knocking returned. But this time, it was faster, louder, shaking the frame so hard I thought the wood might split. Then I heard a whisper. It scraped through the air like dry leaves dragged across stone. "Open up, Elias." It knew my name. That was the moment real fear settled into my chest. Not panic, not surprise. Something deeper, something ancient. I didn't open the door again. I backed into the farthest corner of the room and clutched my duffel bag like it could protect me. The knocking stopped, but the sound didn't disappear. I could hear movement outside. Slow pacing, heavy footsteps circling the house. Sometimes it paused near the walls, and I felt the cold seep inward, like something pressing its weight against the wood. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light broke through the filthy windows, the air warmed again. The house fell silent, as if nothing had happened. I didn't wait around to question it. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside. As I stepped off the porch, a man from the neighboring house hurried toward me. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with disbelief. "You slept in there?" he demanded, gripping my arm tightly. "Son, that house isn't empty. The man who owned it was found dead inside. They said it wasn't an animal, wasn't a person. Whoever killed him, it never left." I pulled my arm free. I didn't need to hear more. For the first time since I ran away, I felt something worse than the fear I had at home. My stepmother was cruel, but she was human. She had limits. That thing in the house did not. I decided to go back home. When I reached my street, my father was standing on the porch. His face looked older, tired, lined with something that might have been regret. He stepped toward me before I could speak and apologized. He said he had seen things after I left, heard the way my stepmother spoke when she thought he wasn't listening. He promised she would never touch me again. For the first time, he believed me. Life at home changed after that. The cruelty stopped. The house felt lighter. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the air turns cold for no reason, I hear it again. A faint scratching breeze outside my window. And sometimes, beneath that sound, I hear a whisper dragging across the darkness. "Open up, Elias." And I can't help but wonder if leaving that abandoned house wasn't enough. What if it followed me home? I told myself. People always say that having a family means having the whole world. They say your family understands you when no one else does. They say family brings peace during the hardest moments of your life. For most people, that may be true. But sometimes, the idea of family can mean something completely different to someone else. And that truth became clear after I met a strange old woman on a lonely road. I've always believed I was a family man before anything else. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was for my wife and my 2 daughters, who lived quietly in the valley, while other men complained about long hours. I took on 3 different jobs in the city without hesitation. Construction in the morning, warehouse shifts in the afternoon, and security work at night. I barely slept, but I told myself it was worth it. Every drop of sweat meant food on their table, school fees paid on time, and a roof that didn't leak during the rainy season. After 6 long months working on a major construction project far from home, I was finally driving back to them. I could already picture my daughters running toward me. I imagined my wife standing at the doorway, pretending to be calm but smiling in that quiet way she always did when she was happy. The thought of being home again filled me with relief I can't properly describe. But life rarely moves according to our plans. At exactly 7 p.m., while driving along a narrow stretch of road that didn't even show up clearly on my GPS, my engine made a sharp, sickening hiss. Within seconds, smoke slipped out from under the hood. The steering wheel stiffened. The car shuddered once, then completely died. I stepped out and looked around. There were no buildings, no lights, no passing cars, just endless land stretching into darkness. When I reached for my phone, my heart dropped. It wasn't in my pocket. Then I remembered. I had left both my phone and my wallet on the counter, at a gas station nearly 50 miles back. I had been in a rush and completely forgot them. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with no money, no communication, and a dead car. For a few minutes, I just sat on the bumper, staring at the fading light in the sky. Sleeping inside the car seemed like my only option, but something about the emptiness of that road felt wrong. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. That was when I saw her. I saw a small, frail figure was walking slowly along a narrow dirt path that cut through the trees. As she came closer, I saw she was an old woman wrapped tightly in a thin shawl that looked almost like it was woven from fragile threads. Her steps were slow, but steady. I stood up quickly and explained everything. "My car broke down," I said. "I don't have my phone or my wallet." I just need somewhere to stay until morning." She stared at me with pale, cloudy eyes for several seconds. Then she nodded. "I live in the old estate up the hill," she said in a dry, rasping voice. "My family left it to me. It is forgotten by the world, but it has a bed." Something about her words made me pause. The phrase "my family left it to me" felt strange, though I couldn't explain why. Still, the night air was growing colder, and I had no better choice. I locked my car and followed her up the hill. The house came into view slowly through the trees. It was large but worn down, with cracked windows and walls that seemed to lean slightly under their own weight. From a distance, it looked less like a home and more like a monument to something long dead. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old flowers, like roses that had dried decades ago. She led me to a small sitting area where a weak fire burned in the fireplace. She offered me a bowl of thin stew. I was too hungry to question it. We sat in silence at first. Then I began talking, mostly to fill the uncomfortable quiet. I told her about my construction work, about how difficult it had been to stay away from home. I described my daughters, how they loved to draw pictures for me. I spoke about my wife and how she kept everything together while I was gone. The moment I said the word family, I saw it. Her expression changed. It wasn't subtle. Her jaw tightened. The softness in her face disappeared. Her eyes, which had looked dull and tired, suddenly burned with something intense. Something that looked like anger mixed with pain. The air in the room felt thick, almost hard to breathe. I stopped talking for a second, unsure what had caused it. But just as quickly as it appeared, she forced a small smile and looked away. I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe she was just lonely. Maybe she missed her own relatives. Eventually, she showed me to a guest room. The bed looked old but usable. I thanked her and lay down, but I didn't fully relax. Years of working in dangerous construction sites had trained my body to stay alert. Even while resting, part of me will still be awake. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft creak from the hallway, then another, then a very clear sound of slow scraping of metal against wood. It sounded exactly like a knife being pulled from a wooden block, a quiet ching noise. My eyes opened immediately. The door slowly creaked open, and moonlight spilled into the room. She stood there in the doorway. The old woman was holding a long kitchen knife. The blade reflected pale silver light. She didn't look fragile anymore. She moved toward me with sudden speed, jerky but powerful. As she lunged, I rolled off the bed just in time. The knife sank deep into the mattress where my chest had been seconds before. We struggled. Her strength shocked me. It didn't match her thin body. I managed to grab her wrist and twisted until the knife dropped. I pushed her backward with all the force I had and ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. I burst through the front door and ran straight into the dark. Bush surrounding the house, branches scratched my arms and face, but I kept moving until I was far enough away to hide. I stayed there until sunrise, crouched in the shadows, watching the house from a distance. It looked peaceful again in the morning light, quiet, almost harmless, but I kept asking myself one question. Why did she change the moment I mentioned family? Did her own family abandon her? Did they betray her so deeply that hearing about love felt like an insult? Did something tragic happen inside that house long ago? Sometimes pain doesn't fade but rots. And maybe for her, the word family wasn't comfort. Maybe it was a reminder of something that destroyed her. What do you think could make someone hate the idea of family so much that it turns into violence? I need your answers. Since I was 7 years old, the hollow had been my sanctuary. It was a hidden patch of woods tucked behind my old high school, concealed by a steep ravine and a wall of thick brambles that most people wouldn't bother pushing through. To anyone else, it was just another overgrown stretch of forest. But to me, it was a sacred ground. For 13 years, I went there whenever life felt too loud or too heavy. I went there to think, to cry, to sit in silence when the world felt unbearable. Even at 20 years old, long after I'd graduated, I still returned. It was the only place that felt completely mine. I never told a single person about it. Not my parents, not my closest friends, and definitely not my girlfriend, Sarah. One Friday afternoon, everything fell apart. Sarah and I had an argument that went too far. It wasn't about anything dramatic at first, just small frustrations that had been building up for months. But then the words started coming out sharper, meaner. We both said things we couldn't take back. I saw the hurt in her eyes before I walked away, but pride kept me from apologizing. By the time I left her apartment, my chest felt tight, like something inside me was collapsing. There was only one place I could think to go, the hollow. The walk there felt longer than usual. The sky was gray. The air was thick and heavy before an expected storm. I pushed through the familiar brambles, slid carefully down the ravine, and stepped into the small clearing that had held my secrets for over a decade. The creek ran slow and murky, barely moving. I sat on my favorite moss-covered log and stared at the stagnant water, trying to replay the fight in my head. I told myself I would call her later. I told myself we would fix it. We always did. That was when I felt it. The hair on the back of my neck rose as if an electric current had passed through me. The forest, which had always felt calm, suddenly felt watchful. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. They were deliberate and slow, pressing down on leaves and small twigs behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see a lost hiker or maybe a stray dog that had wandered down from a nearby trail. But the woods were empty. The trees stood still. No movement. No one is there. Then my eyes dropped to the ground. In the soft, damp mud just a few feet away, a footprint appeared. I didn't see a shoe. I didn't see a leg. Just the impression in the mud, forming as if an invisible person had stepped there. Another footprint appeared beside it. Then another. They were walking toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, unable to look away as each step formed in the earth. The invisible trail continued until it stopped exactly where I had been, standing seconds earlier. My mind screamed at me to run. I turned, my body ready to bolt up the ravine, when a scream split the air. The scream was sharp, raw, filled with terror, and I recognized it instantly. It was Sarah. The sound came from behind me, from the clearing, from the exact spot I had just left. Every rational thought vanished. I sprinted back toward the log, branches clawing at my arms, my lungs burning as I forced myself faster. When I broke into the clearing, everything felt wrong. The air was still, too still. Sarah was lying on the ground near the mossy log. Her body was twisted slightly, as if she had collapsed mid-step. I dropped to my knees beside her, calling her name, shaking her shoulders. Her skin was cold. Her eyes were open, frozen wide in absolute terror. She looked like she had seen something so horrifying that her body simply gave up. But there was no blood, no wounds, no bruises, no sign of the struggle. It was as if fear alone had stopped her heart. I called the police immediately. The police arrived within the hour. I could barely speak as I tried to explain what had happened. They searched the hollow thoroughly. They photographed the mud. They examined the creek. They questioned me over and over about why we were there. I told them the truth. I hadn't invited her. I hadn't even known she was coming. They found my footprints clearly marked in the mud. They also found the other set, the ones that had appeared out of nowhere. The trail of the invisible footprints led straight toward the creek, and then stopped, as if whatever made them had simply stepped into the water and vanished. There were no other tracks, no signs of another person entering through the brambles, no fingerprints, no weapon. The coroner ruled it as sudden cardiac arrest, possibly triggered by extreme fear or shock. But Sarah had been healthy, young, strong. There was no history of heart problems. Her family demanded answers the police couldn't provide. The case went cold within months, but I never found peace. There's one question that keeps me awake at night. How did she know where I was? I never told her about the hollow. I never brought her there. I never even described it. It had been my secret since I was 7 years old. Unless it wasn't just my secret. Sometimes I think back to the first time I found the hollow as a child. I remember feeling like I wasn't alone, even then. I remember talking out loud sometimes, pretending someone was listening. I remember strange ripples in the creek when there was no wind. What if something noticed me all those years ago? What if it stayed there, waiting, watching? And what if, after 13 years of visiting alone, I unknowingly led it to what it wanted? Maybe a witness or a gift. Sarah's final expression is burned into my memory. Whatever she saw in that clearing, it wasn't me. And I can't stop wondering if I go back to the hollow. Will the footprints appear again? Will I be safe in the hollow again?